Marlene Carter had always considered herself someone who listened carefully to her instincts, even when she could not explain why they were speaking so loudly. At 32, she had been living with her husband Jake and their 3-year-old daughter Lila in Jake's childhood home, a modest 2-story house in the outskirts of Springfield, Missouri. The place had a warm charm to it with its creaky wooden floors, old framed photographs on the walls, and the subtle smell of coffee that seemed permanently embedded in the kitchen cabinets. It was the kind of house where people believed children grew up safely and where grandparents played an essential role. But for months, something inside Marlene had been tightening, twisting, pressing against her ribs every single night. It all began with the strange pattern that developed around Lila's bedtime. Lila, a bright and cheerful little girl who spent her days running in circles, singing songs to her stuffed animals, and demanding strawberry yogurt before nap time, acted completely differently when the sun went down. She cried, screamed, begged to leave her parents' room, and stretched her arms toward the hallway while calling for one person over and over again. She wanted her grandfather, Elliot Carter. At first, everyone thought it was sweet. Elliot was a retired mail carrier who had spent decades walking routes through town, greeting neighbors, and slipping treats to every dog he met. He was quiet, gentle, and the type of man who saved every Father's Day card his son ever made him. When Lila reached for him, Elliot seemed pleasantly surprised. He would chuckle softly, scoop her up with effort, and lay her down beside him in his room with the soft assurance of an old man who believed he knew how to calm a child better than anyone else. The first few nights Marlene felt relieved. A crying toddler could drain every ounce of patience from a person, and the idea that Lila slept easily beside her grandfather almost felt like a blessing. Jake teased her a little whenever she seemed hesitant. He told her that some kids simply bonded with certain family members more strongly and that it was wonderful that Lila had such affection for his father. But the feeling inside Marlene did not go away. It grew. It stretched. It scratched at her mind like a warning. Night after night, Lila would fall apart whenever Marlene tried to keep her in the bedroom she shared with Jake. The little girl cried so hard her face turned red and her voice cracked. Eventually she sobbed so intensely that her tiny chest trembled. The moment they opened the door and Elliot appeared, sometimes wearing his old flannel robe and rubbing sleep from his eyes, Lila instantly calmed. She lifted her arms to him, rested her head on his shoulder, and drifted off as if she had never shed a tear. The speed of it was unsettling. But what bothered Marlene even more was how completely Lila changed in the mornings. She would come back from Elliot's room quiet, almost vacant for a while. She would not chatter about her dreams or ask for pancakes like she normally did. She would simply sit still, blinking slowly, until after breakfast when she finally seemed to return to her lively self. No one else seemed to notice. Not Jake. Not Jake's mother Judith. Not even Elliot, who happily poured himself coffee and hummed as if life were perfectly ordinary. One night, the crying began earlier than usual. Jake was still at work and Judith had gone to bed with a headache. Marlene sat on the edge of the mattress trying to soothe Lila with lullabies and gentle back rubs, but nothing worked. The child kicked, twisted, and cried hoarsely, repeating the same exhausted plea for her grandfather. Outside, rain tapped steadily against the window and the wind crept through the cracks like a cold breath. The house felt enormous and strangely hollow. There was something about that particular night that made the uneasiness inside Marlene flare stronger than ever before. Finally she whispered to Lila that she could go see Grandpa, and the little girl ran down the hallway with surprising energy. Marlene watched her disappear into Elliot's room, watched the soft light spill from the crack beneath the door, watched everything go eerily silent the moment the door clicked shut. She lay in the dark for nearly an hour, staring at the ceiling, feeling her chest tighten. Eventually her fear became unbearable. She slid out of bed, feet barely making a sound against the wooden floor. She tiptoed toward Elliot's room, heart pounding, palms damp, breath trembling. The The door was not fully closed. A narrow sliver of warm yellow light cut into the hallway. She nudged the door just enough to see inside. What she saw stunned her so completely that she forgot how to breathe. Elliot lay on the bed with Lila nestled against him, but the part that made her freeze in place was his expression. His face looked rigid, far too tense for someone who was simply comforting a sleeping grandchild. His hand rested over Lila's body in a way that seemed too tight, too controlled. His gaze was fixed forward, not toward the ceiling, not toward the child, but toward nothing at all, like someone lost deep inside an anxious thought. He did not notice her standing there. For a moment, Marlene could not move. The world felt blurry, like she had walked into a dream that didn't make sense. She could not explain what she saw, and she did not know how to interpret it, but her instincts screamed louder than they ever had before. Something about the moment felt deeply wrong. Not criminal. Not violent. But wrong in a way that sent a shiver running through every nerve in her body. She stepped back before the door creaked. She gently closed it and pressed her back to the hallway wall, trying to steady her breathing. The fear inside her was no longer a whisper. It was a roar. She returned to her bedroom but didn't sleep at all. She lay awake until sunrise, listening to the storm fade, wondering what she had just witnessed and what it meant. All she knew was that she could not ignore her instincts anymore. Whatever was happening in this house, she needed to understand it. She needed to protect her daughter. Even if she did not yet know from what. And that was the night everything began to change. The morning after Marlene witnessed that unsettling scene, the entire Carter household woke up as if nothing unusual had happened at all. Elliot hummed while making coffee in the kitchen, pouring himself a cup from the old drip pot he had used for years. Judith moved around the house in her patterned slippers, complaining about the weather and the fact that the laundry still wasn't folded. Jake returned from his early shift, kissed his daughter on the forehead, and chatted lightly with his father about a basketball game on TV. And Lila acted cheerful, even bubbly, as if she hadn't spent the night curled tightly in her grandfather's arms with a strange tension hanging over the room. She ran around the living room hugging her stuffed bear and giggling loudly every time Jake lifted her up. On the surface everything looked harmless, almost comforting, and yet the memory of what Marlene had seen clung to her chest like a weight she could not loosen. She watched her daughter carefully, searching for something, anything, that might explain what her instincts were telling her. But Lila simply smiled, babbled, and pulled on her mother's sleeve, as innocent as any 3-year-old child. The contrast between her morning lightness and her nightly desperation to be with Elliot only deepened Marlene's unease. When Jake finally noticed how quiet she was, he asked if she was feeling sick. She forced a smile and said she hadn't slept well. That was true enough. But she could not bring herself to describe what she had seen. Not yet. She already knew what Jake would say. He would tell her she was overthinking, misinterpreting, letting her stress get the best of her. He trusted his father completely, to a degree that bordered on blind devotion. It was a loyalty Marlene had always admired, but now that loyalty stood between her and the truth she needed to understand. That afternoon, while Judith prepared lunch and Jake left for another shift, Marlene sat on the couch with Lila, her mind spinning. She thought about calling someone. Maybe a therapist. Maybe a family counselor. But every option felt too heavy without more clarity. She decided instead to call her closest friend, someone she trusted to listen without judgment. Holly had been her roommate back in Kansas City during college, and though distance had kept them from seeing each other often, their conversations remained as honest and raw as they had always been. When Holly answered the phone, Marlene's voice trembled as she described the past few months. She explained how Lila cried every night unless she slept with Elliot, how she woke up strangely quiet each morning, how uncomfortable she felt even though she couldn't name exactly why. Holly listened silently, as she always did, letting Marlene pour out her confusion and fear. It wasn't until Marlene described what she had seen the night before that Holly interrupted her with a long, heavy breath. "Marlene," she said softly, "I'm not telling you to panic, but your instincts matter. You cannot ignore how you feel. You don't need proof of wrongdoing to trust your gut. You just need to make sure your daughter is safe." Hearing someone say it aloud sent a tremor through Marlene's chest. Her hands shook slightly as she pressed her palm into the couch cushion. She didn't want to accuse Elliot of anything terrible. She didn't even know what she was accusing him of. But she also could not shake the fear that something about this situation was not right. Holly suggested that she document the nightly patterns. Not because she believed something dangerous was happening, but because clarity mattered. If Marlene could look back on the moments that bothered her, she might understand them better. It wasn't about catching anyone doing anything wrong. It was about observing what she couldn't explain.
Holly's voice grew firmer. "If you feel uneasy, don't ignore it.
Even if nothing is happening, even if everything turns out to be harmless, you deserve peace of mind." After they hung up, Marlene sat in silence. She felt slightly steadier now that someone else validated her fear, but she still wasn't sure how to proceed. Her heart kept replaying the image of Elliot's tense face, the way he held Lila as if something inside him was unraveling. She didn't want to believe anything negative about the man who raised her husband, the man who built this house with his own hands, who kept a drawer filled with Lila's drawings as if they were priceless. The hours crawled by until night fell again. Lila grew restless as soon as she saw Marlene bring out her pajamas. The whining began. Then the crying. Then the full meltdown that Jake had brushed off so many times. Lila clung to the doorframe, screaming for her grandfather, her tiny fists pounding on the hallway floor. Marlene felt her stomach twist. She lifted her daughter, trying not to cry herself, and whispered promises that Lila would be okay sleeping with her tonight. But Lila thrashed and sobbed until her face turned blotchy and she struggled to breathe. The moment Elliot appeared in the hallway, everything stopped. Lila went limp against Marlene's shoulder. She reached out for Elliot, her voice softening into hiccups. Elliot pressed his hand to her back and rocked her gently, murmuring something that Marlene couldn't hear. Within minutes Lila was calm. The transformation was too extreme, too unnatural. That night, Marlene made herself do something she had been terrified to do. She retrieved the tiny camera Holly had mailed to her during a previous conversation about baby monitors. The device was barely larger than a button and easy to hide. Her pulse raced as she crept past Elliot's room while he brushed his teeth. She slipped inside quickly, examining the room for a discreet place to leave the camera. The nightstand seemed too obvious. The bookshelf too exposed. Finally she saw a small decorative bowl on top of Elliot's dresser, filled with coins, keys, and old receipts. She tucked the camera behind it where it would not be found unless someone emptied the bowl. She left the room quietly and waited. The night dragged on with unbearable slowness. Marlene sat upright in her bed, clutching the blankets against her chest, listening to every creak of the house. She did not sleep. She barely blinked. At sunrise she rushed to retrieve the camera and watched the footage on her phone, heart thudding. Most of the recording was uneventful. Lila slept deeply, her small frame rising and falling with each breath. Elliot shifted beside her, sometimes waking briefly to adjust the blanket. But around midnight, he sat up and stared at Lila in a way that made the hair on Marlene's arms stand nearly straight. His face was tight again, deeply troubled, as if he were battling some inner turmoil that he could not speak aloud. He placed his hand on Lila's back, paused, then slowly leaned down, studying her features with an intensity that felt out of place. He did nothing wrong. Nothing harmful. Nothing anyone could point to as inappropriate. But it was strange. Too strange. The kind of strange that clung to Marlene's lungs until her breaths felt shallow. When Jake returned home that evening, she considered telling him everything. She almost opened her mouth. She almost showed him the footage. But then she looked at him laughing with his father, the two of them teasing each other about a football game, and she froze. Jake loved his father. He trusted him completely. If Marlene voiced even a hint of concern, she knew Jake would see it as an attack. He would think she had lost her mind, or worse, that she was trying to drive a wedge into the family. She could already imagine the arguments, the disbelief, the accusations of paranoia. She swallowed her words and said nothing. The following day passed like a heavy cloud hovering above her. She avoided Elliot, though he greeted her warmly at breakfast. She watched Lila closely and tried to be cheerful, but every movement, every change in her daughter's expression, became a source of tension. That night, when Lila once again demanded her grandfather, Marlene's fear grew sharper than it had ever been. It no longer felt like vague unease. It felt like something real pressing against her chest. She knew she could not ignore this anymore. Something was happening in this house. Something she could not fully interpret yet. Something she needed to understand before it was too late. And Marlene realized with a trembling certainty that the next nights would reveal far more than she was prepared to face. The third night after Marlene placed the hidden camera in Elliot's bedroom felt heavier than any night before it. A thick quiet settled over the Carter household, the kind of quiet that clings to the walls and makes even normal sounds feel unnatural. The ticking clock in the living room seemed louder. The hum of the refrigerator seemed deeper. Even the floors creaked in a slower rhythm, as though the house itself sensed the tension radiating from Marlene. That evening, after everyone had eaten a simple dinner of chicken soup and cornbread, Judith disappeared into her room complaining of a lingering migraine. Jake settled onto the couch to watch a rerun of an old comedy show, and Elliot read a newspaper beside him, flipping pages with the gentle rustle of someone lost in routine. But Marlene could not settle. She moved through the house with a stiffness in her shoulders she couldn't shake. Her thoughts ran circles around themselves, replaying the image from the camera over and over. Elliot sitting upright in bed, his face etched with tension, staring at the sleeping child beside him. He hadn't done anything overtly wrong, yet her instincts screamed as though she had witnessed something far more alarming. As bedtime approached, Lila began her now familiar pattern. Her bottom lip trembled. Her hands balled up. She whined, then cried, then escalated into that desperate reaching motion toward the hallway toward him. Marlene felt her throat tighten. She gathered her daughter into her arms, whispering words meant to soothe, but her attempts failed almost immediately. Lila sobbed and twisted away from her, calling for her grandfather with raw desperation. Jake eventually stepped in, shaking his head with that tired half-smile that suggested he believed Marlene was stressing over nothing. He lifted their daughter, bounced her gently, murmured calming words that didn't calm her. Finally, in frustration, he called for his father. The moment Elliot appeared, Lila lunged toward him. Her tears evaporated almost instantly. Marlene watched helplessly as he carried her toward his room, the hallway light casting long shadows behind them. The door closed. Silence swallowed the house. But tonight, Marlene couldn't wait passively. Her fear had grown roots. It had formed shape. It pressed on her so hard she felt nauseous. She sat in her dim bedroom replaying Elliot's expression from the recording. Every detail lodged in her mind with painful clarity. The way he stared at Lila too long. The way his jaw clenched. The way he adjusted her blanket with hands that trembled slightly, as though fighting some internal turmoil. She needed answers. With trembling hands, Marlene pulled the second camera from her dresser, a smaller one she had hidden earlier in a drawer, waiting for the moment when her unease became unbearable. This camera was disguised as a decorative button, no larger than the tip of her thumb. It had been Holly's idea. Holly wasn't paranoid by nature, but she understood what gut instinct felt like. Better to have clarity, her friend had said. Clarity isn't a crime. Marlene swallowed hard and tucked the button camera into the plush ear of Lila's favorite stuffed bunny. She positioned it at the perfect angle, tested the recording briefly, then waited for the hallway to fall still before walking softly toward Elliot's room. She waited until the bathroom faucet shut off and Elliot's footsteps receded down the hall. Only then did she slip into his room and place the bunny near the foot of the bed, right where Lila always curled up. The dim glow of the bedside lamp lit the room enough for Marlene to see that the sheets were neatly folded back, ready for the night. She stepped out and closed the door silently behind her. When she returned to her own room, Jake was already asleep. The soft rise and fall of his chest was normally soothing, a reminder that she wasn't alone in raising their daughter, but tonight even that comfort couldn't reach her.
The house felt wrong.
The air felt wrong. Every instinct screamed that she needed to stay awake, watchful. She sat propped against the headboard with her phone open to the feed from the hallway camera. She could not see inside Elliot's room, but she could see the sliver of light beneath his door and the occasional shift of shadows as he moved. Every small disturbance made her jump. Around 1 a.m, the shadows shifted again and this time Elliot opened his bedroom door. Marlene's pulse spiked. She pressed her hand over her mouth to keep from gasping. Elliot stepped into the hallway with slow, careful movements. He glanced left, then right, then quietly walked toward the room Marlene shared with Jake. He paused outside their door, standing completely still for several seconds. His posture was stiff, tall, almost statuesque. He lifted his hand toward the doorknob but didn't touch it. He simply held it there, inches away, inhaling sharply as though fighting some intense internal impulse.
Marlene frotze.
Her heart pounded so hard she feared it would wake Jake. She stared at the screen, hardly able to breathe. Why was he standing outside their room at 1 a.m? Why did he look conflicted, almost tormented? He dropped his hand, straightened, and walked back to his room just as quietly as he had emerged. Marlene sat paralyzed for nearly 5 minutes afterward. Only when her arms began to ache did she realize how tightly she had been gripping the phone. Sometime after 3, her fatigue became overwhelming. She forced herself to lie down, though her body remained coiled with tension. Sleep slipped in and out, each time interrupted by new waves of anxiety. At dawn, she rushed to retrieve Lila's stuffed bunny from Elliot's room. She thanked him politely, forcing her voice to remain calm, and carried her daughter back to the kitchen for breakfast. Judith scolded her gently about bringing the child in too early, complaining that Lila always slept best in Elliot's room. Marlene ignored her. Her stomach churned with anticipation. The moment no one was watching, she darted into her room, locked the door, and pressed play on the video footage. At first, the camera captured only peaceful routine.
Lila sleeping, Elliot shifting. Nothing alarming. Then, close to 1 a.m, Elliot rose from the bed. The camera caught everything.
He hovered over Lila for far too long, studying her face with an intensity that made Marlene's skin crawl. His breathing became uneven. He whispered something under his breath too soft for the microphone to catch. Then he leaned closer.
Much too close. Still no harmful act.
No touching. No violation.
Only deeply troubling behavior.
But then came the part that made Marlene's knees weaken. Elliot turned abruptly toward the bedroom door as if suddenly aware of something watching. His eyes swept the room again and again. His posture stiffened. Then he walked out. That matched exactly what she had seen on the hallway camera. Marlene sank onto her bed, both relieved and terrified. There was no crime in the recording. No physical wrongdoing. Yet the emotional weight of what she saw felt crushing. She knew now that this wasn't merely a child preferring a grandparent. Something under the surface was eating at Elliot, something unsettling and unpredictable. Something that made her daughter cling to him so fiercely and yet return each morning strangely subdued. She had more questions than answers, but one truth became unavoidable: she could not ignore this any longer. She needed help. She needed clarity. She needed protection for herself and for her daughter. And as the house stirred with the sounds of mourning, Marlene realized with chilling certainty that the nights ahead would be far more complicated than she had imagined. The next several days in the Carter household unfolded like an invisible battle. No one spoke about anything unusual, yet each person seemed to move through the house as if a storm cloud lingered just above their heads. For Marlene, every hour felt like holding her breath underwater. Her heart worked overtime, pumping fear and uncertainty through her veins. She had the footage from both cameras saved carefully on her phone and backed up twice more, tucked physically and digitally away, as if protecting something fragile and explosive. What she didn't know yet was what to do with it. She spent each morning sitting with Lila at the dining room table, helping her smear peanut butter on toast, watching every small gesture. Sometimes Lila seemed perfectly normal, giggling and scrunching her nose whenever Marlene tapped it. But every so often, when Marlene asked, "Did you sleep well with Grandpa?" the little girl would go strangely still, her eyes drifting away as though the question had pressed some button she didn't know how to answer. Then she would shrug and change the subject to something a toddler could control, like asking for her purple cup. Marlene kept her face composed, but inside she was sinking. At night, the routine remained exactly the same. No matter how early Marlene tried to start bedtime, no matter how gently she read stories or sang lullabies, Lila only grew increasingly distressed. The moment Jake suggested going to Elliot's room, the crying abruptly stopped. It was like watching a switch flip. Marlene knew children had patterns, habits, comfort objects, but this wasn't comfort. This was dependency. Fear. Something deeper she couldn't yet name. Jake still didn't see it. He seemed exhausted by Marlene's questions, though she rarely voiced them directly. Every time she tried to hint that something felt off, something in Elliot's behavior, something in the way Lila acted around him, Jake shut down the conversation before it had a chance to begin. "Marlene, you're tired," he would say.
"You overthinking again. My dad raised me.
He's harmless." But harmless wasn't the word that lived in Marlene's chest anymore. The moment that cemented her fear happened on a Thursday evening. The Carter family was preparing for a small gathering. Judith had insisted on inviting several relatives over for a dinner in memory of Jake's late grandmother. It wasn't a formal event, just a way for the family to reconnect. Cousins were bringing casserole dishes, uncles were buying drinks, and everyone was expected to show up with stories and laughter. Judith loved things like that. She believed family gatherings stitched the seams of life back together. But for Marlene, it felt like walking into a performance she wasn't prepared for. All day she felt tense, hyper-aware of Elliot's movements, hyper-aware of where Lila was at every moment. She never let her daughter leave her sight. Not even for a few seconds. Her heart jolted whenever Elliot walked nearby or tried to pick Lila up. She would invent excuses. Lila needed to potty, Lila needed her mama, Lila was cranky, avoid letting Elliot hold her. Judith noticed immediately. "Marlene," she scolded softly while chopping vegetables.
"You act like Elliot doesn't know how to hold a child. He raised 2 boys, for heaven's sake." Marlene forced a tight smile.
"I'm just being cautious. You know how toddlers are. They cling to one person sometimes."
Judith narrowed her eyes.
"Cling? She's clung to Elliot since she was a baby. It's natural she prefers him."
"Why does it bother you now?"
That question pierced Marlene harder than she expected. She turned away under the pretense of checking the oven, but really she was hiding her expression. She didn't want Judith to see how shaken she was. She didn't want anyone to know how frightened she felt. The guests arrived at 6. The house filled with noise and warmth, laughter bouncing off the walls, scents of baked casseroles and fresh rolls mixing with the soft music humming in the background. Children played in the living room while the adults chatted in clusters. Elliot positioned himself in his usual recliner, greeting everyone with the calm, friendly smile he always wore. He looked normal. Completely normal. Completely harmless. And Lila, as if magnetized, drifted closer and closer to him until she ended up sitting at his feet, rolling her toy car back and forth on the carpet. A few relatives commented on how sweet it was. Someone even joked that Lila must think Elliot hung the moon. Marlene felt her chest constrict again. She couldn't sit still. She walked into the kitchen, pretending to refill a drink, but really she just needed a few seconds to breathe. Her friend Holly's voice echoed in her mind.
Do not ignore what you feel.
Even without proof, your instincts matter. But the problem was she did have something. Not definitive proof of harm, but undeniably concerning behavior. A grandfather whose nighttime rituals seemed off balance, whose presence made Marlene's daughter overly attached and unusually quiet afterward. The footage of him staring for long stretches of time, the trembling hands, the midnight wandering, none of it added up to anything clear, but it painted a picture of a man struggling with something concealed beneath the surface. During the gathering, Marlene noticed how people complimented Elliot. They praised him as the perfect grandfather. Several even said, "Lila's so lucky," which made Marlene's throat close. When one aunt mentioned how rare it was for a young child to bond so intensely with an older relative, Elliot smiled with pride. But Marlene flinched. After an hour of tense watching, her heartbeat reached the breaking point. She realized she couldn't wait anymore. She couldn't keep the footage hidden. If she continued living with this fear inside her, it would devour her. She had to show it to someone else. Someone who wasn't Holly. Someone inside the family, even if they refused to believe her. She had to show Jake. Her hands trembled as she made the decision. When she finally approached Jake, he was standing near the dining table talking with his cousin. She tugged gently at his sleeve, her voice low but urgent.
Jake, can you come with me for a minute?
He glanced at her, mildly annoyed at being pulled away, but followed her down the hallway toward their bedroom. She closed the door softly behind them. Her heartbeat felt like it was lodged in her throat.
What is going on?
Jake asked with a frown. Marlene grabbed her phone, opened the gallery, and pulled up the footage from the stuffed bunny. Words tangled in her chest. She didn't know how to begin. Every sentence she rehearsed in her head sounded accusatory, and she didn't want to accuse, she just wanted to be understood. She wanted someone to say, "Yes, that looks concerning.
You re not crazy."
But when she held out the phone, Jake didn't take it. He stared at her hand for a long moment, then lifted his eyes to hers. "What is that?" he asked slowly. "The footage from the baby camera," she said, feeling heat rise behind her eyes.
"What camera?"
Her breath caught. She hesitated, and that was her mistake. Jake's expression shifted instantly from confusion to irritation. "You're putting cameras in my parents' house?" he demanded. He stepped back as though the device itself were dangerous.
"Marlene, what the hell is wrong with you?"
Her stomach dropped. She tried to speak, but the words tangled with panic. "Jake, please, just watch it."
I am not making anything up. I've been feeling uneasy for weeks.
"I just need you to see what I'm seeing. Lila only sleeps when she's with your dad, and when I tried to keep her with me, she sobbed as if something terrible would happen."
I am scared, Jake. Please.
I just need you to watch. Jake shook his head.
No.
Absolutely not.
You spying on my father. This is insane.
I'm not spying, she whispered. I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to figure out why Lila acts that way. Look at this one clip, please. Jake's jaw clenched. I don't need to watch. My dad is not doing anything wrong.
You losing it, Marlene.
You're exhausted and imagining things again. You're creating drama where there is none. His words struck her like a blow. The tears she had been swallowing for days finally slipped past her defenses. She held the phone out again, but Jake refused to touch it. He raised his voice just enough that she feared the relatives in the living room might hear. I'm done with this conversation, he said firmly.
This ends tonight.
You need to stop acting paranoid. Stop suggesting my father is some kind of danger. If you keep this up, Marlene, you're going to tear this whole family apart. He left the room before she could reply. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving her standing in the middle of the room with her hands trembling around her phone. She sank to the edge of the bed and let the tears fall silently, afraid to sob because she didn't want anyone to hear. The distant laughter of family members drifted down the hallway, horribly mismatched with the storm brewing inside her chest. Not one person would believe her now. Not one person would even listen. She sat there for several minutes, unable to move, unable to gather her strength.
The world felt tilted, off balance, impossible to steady.
She had no partner in this. No one in the Carter family wanted to acknowledge fear. They only wanted to protect peace, tradition, reputation. Meanwhile, she felt her daughter slipping further and further into something she did not understand. But in that moment of despair, a thought rose inside her, not gentle, not tentative, but fierce and unbreakable. If no one would protect Lila but her, then she would do it alone. She wiped her face, stood up straight, and walked back into the living room with a calmness she did not feel. People were laughing, drinking, and chatting as if nothing in the world was wrong. Elliot sat comfortably in his recliner. Lila curled at his feet, her little head resting on the side of his leg as if she belonged there. A few relatives cooed at how sweet the scene was. Marlene felt her entire body coil. She bent down, lifted Lila into her arms, and held her close. The child squirmed at first, whining softly for her grandfather, but Marlene pulled her tighter and whispered soothingly into her hair. It's okay, baby, she murmured.
Mama es got you.
Even if no one else understood, even if no one else believed her, Marlene knew the truth inside her bones. Something was deeply, profoundly wrong. And from this night forward, nothing in this house would ever be the same. The morning after the family gathering, the Carter household felt strangely quiet, too quiet, in fact, as if the laughter from the night before had been swallowed whole and replaced by something brittle and uneasy. Sunlight spilled across the kitchen tiles, but even the warm glow could not soften the tension that now lived within those walls. Marlene woke early, unable to sleep after the confrontation with Jake. Her mind replayed last night endlessly, the look of disbelief on Jake's face, the hurt that flashed in his eyes, the refusal to even glance at the footage she'd risked everything to collect. It was as if her husband had chosen his father over her without hesitation. She didn't know whether to feel betrayed or simply heartbroken. Lila stirred beside her, tangled in blankets. The child blinked sleepily, her curls sticking to her forehead. For a moment she looked peaceful, but the instant she fully realized she wasn't in Elliot's room, a frown creased her face. "Where's Grandpa?"
Lila murmured softly, rubbing her eyes.
Marlene swallowed hard, forcing her voice to remain steady.
"You with Mama this morning, sweetheart. Let us go get breakfast."
But Lila seemed unsettled, restless in a way Marlene hadn't seen before. She clung to her mother's leg tighter than usual. It was as though the child was caught between two worlds, the comfort she found with Elliot at night and the confusion she felt away from him during the day. Marlene lifted her daughter and held her close as they made their way downstairs. Elliot sat at the table reading the newspaper, Judith stirring oatmeal on the stove. Jake was already gone for his early shift, which, in some ways, was a relief. Marlene did not think she had the emotional energy to face him after the previous night's argument. Judith turned, clearly irritated.
"Morning, Marlene.
I was wondering when you'd bring Lila down.
She usually eats with Elliot."
The words sank into Marlene like a pebble dropped into deep water. "I wanted her with me this morning," Marlene replied, kissing Lila's forehead.
Elliot looked up.
His expression was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that made Marlene's nerves tighten. His smile was there, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Good morning, Princess," he said, pushing away from the table slightly.
"Come sit with Grandpa."
Before Marlene could react, Lila reached her arms toward Elliot, wriggling in her mother's grasp.
Marlene's heart pounded.
She held on just a moment longer than necessary, and for that brief moment, she felt the full weight of Judith's stare behind her. Then she slowly lowered Lila to the floor. The child ran to Elliot, who lifted her onto his lap. He brushed her hair back and spoke to her in a low, gentle voice that Marlene had heard thousands of times. And yet, something about it now made her feel sick. Lila's face softened instantly. The uncertainty that lingered moments earlier melted into comfort. Judith clucked her tongue disapprovingly. "You've been acting strange, Marlene.
I don't know what's gotten into you." Marlene pressed her lips together. "I'm just tired."
But neither Judith nor Elliot believed that. They exchanged a look subtle, fleeting, but unmistakable. A look that quietly said, "We know she's the problem." That afternoon, as Judith cleaned the living room and Elliot played with Lila in the den, Marlene slipped into her bedroom and locked the door. Her hands trembled as she retrieved her phone. The footage from the stuffed bunyan from the hallway camera was still there, safe, tucked away. She played the clips again, watching Elliot's movements as if hoping that a new perspective might reveal something she had missed. But everything she saw only made her more certain that her instincts were right. She needed help. She couldn't stay in this house indefinitely while everyone dismissed her fears. But where could she go? She had savings but not much. She had Holly but her friend lived hours away. She had her parents but they lived in another state, and moving would require an explanation that Marlene still struggled to articulate. She was trapped between the truth she felt and the reality everyone else demanded she accept. By evening, her mind was spiraling. Lila began to cry again, pulling at her mother's hand, begging for her grandfather with heartbreaking urgency. Marlene tried everything, hugging her tightly, reading her books, rocking her gently, but nothing soothed the child. At last, Elliot entered the room and Lila ran straight into his arms. Marlene felt like the floor dropped out from beneath her. As soon as Elliot carried Lila into his room and closed the door, Marlene's resolve hardened. She couldn't let this continue. She couldn't let the situation escalate. She couldn't let Jake's denial blind her from protecting her own child. She needed someone to see her perspective clearly, someone who would not judge or dismiss her. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Marlene called Holly again. Her voice shook as soon as Holly answered.
"I can stay here," Marlene whispered.
"Everyone thinks I'm imagining things. Jake won't look at anything. Judith thinks I'm unstable. And Elliot." Her voice caught. She couldn't even say his name without feeling her breath tighten. "Marlene," Holly said gently, "take a breath.
Tell me what happened tonight."
Marlene explained everything, from Jake's refusal to watch the footage to the way Lila cried with desperation each night. Holly listened silently. When Marlene finished, Her breathing shaky, Holly spoke with clear firmness. "Pack a bag. Come stay with me for a while." Marlene blinked, stunned.
"2 Don, now if I can. Jake will think I am running away. Judith will say I am overreacting."
"What if?" Holly cut her off. "You don't need their permission to protect your daughter."
"You come here. Let things calm down. Let your mind settle.
Bring Lila, bring your essentials, and just stay with me for a few days." It sounded so simple when Holly said it. But Marlene's chest tightened with fear.
Running away even temporarily felt monumental.
She thought about Jake's anger, Judith's judgment, Elliot's strange behavior, and the possibility of making everything worse. But then she thought about Lila. Her daughter's little face. Her trembling lip. Her dependency that seemed so out of place. Marlene whispered, "I'll think about it." "No," Holly replied softly.
"Just listen to me.
You have instincts for a reason. Use them." After they hung up, Marlene sat in the dark for a long time. Eventually, she got up and walked quietly to the living room. She watched the light beneath Elliot's bedroom door. It flickered faintly, a sign that he was still awake, perhaps reading or pacing or simply lying there with Lila tucked against him. The sight made her breath hitch. She turned back to her room and opened the closet. Her fingers trembled as she reached for a small backpack. She placed a few of Lila's clothes inside, then a toothbrush, a comb, a blanket, and the stuffed bunny that now felt like both a childhood toy and a lifeline. But when she touched the zipper, she hesitated. Fear tangled in her throat. Would Jake forgive her? Would Judith attack her for leaving? Would Elliot react? She was overwhelmed with the crushing realization that she was making decisions alone. Jake had walked away from her when she needed him the most. Judith refused to understand. And Elliot, she didn't even know what he felt, not truly, not under that calm, practiced smile. After several long minutes, she zipped the bag. Then she hid it under the bed. It was a small step. But it was the first step she had taken toward protecting her daughter without waiting for anyone else to agree. At 3 a.m, Marlene awoke with a jolt when she heard footsteps outside her door.
Heavy, slow footsteps.
She sat upright in bed, frozen. The footsteps stopped right outside, just like they had that other night. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Then, softly, Elliot's voice drifted through the door.
"Lila, grandpa's here." Marlene's blood ran cold.
She did not respond. She did not move. She held her breath until the footsteps finally retreated down the hall, until the house fell silent again. When morning arrived, she knew that something inside her had changed permanently. There was no more doubt.
No more hesitation.
No more waiting for Jake, Judith, or anyone else to believe her. She would protect her daughter whatever it took. She just didn't know yet that the storm was only beginning. And soon, the entire Carter family would be forced to face the truth she carried alone. By the time dawn crept over the horizon, Marlene felt as if she had aged years overnight. The world outside the window glowed pale blue, the kind of early morning light that usually brought peace. But inside the Carter home, nothing felt peaceful anymore. The air felt tight, thick with tension, carrying an unspoken warning that each breath seemed to acknowledge. As soon as Marlene opened her eyes, she felt the weight of everything she had been avoiding.
The secret recordings. The fight with Jake.
The moment Elliot stopped outside her door in the middle of the night, whispering to a child who wasn't even in the room. The backpack she had packed. All of it pressed down on her as though the universe was commanding her not to ignore the truth any longer. Lila woke shortly after, rubbing her eyes with tiny fists. Her curls were tangled, her cheeks flushed with sleep. She blinked up at her mother, confused at first, then unsettled by the realization that she had not woken in Elliot's room. "Where's Grandpa?" she asked immediately, voice trembling. Marlene swallowed hard.
"You with Mama this morning, sweetheart. You're safe."
But Lila didn't seem reassured. Her little hands reached toward the door as if expecting him to appear at any moment. Marlene gently pulled her back and hugged her tighter than usual, pressing her lips to her daughter's forehead, silently promising herself she would never let go. Downstairs, Judith was already moving about the kitchen, banging cabinet doors louder than necessary. The harsh clacks and thuds echoed through the house, each sound a reminder that tension simmered beneath the surface. When Marlene stepped into the kitchen carrying Lila, Judith didn't greet her. She didn't even glance her way. Instead, she kept stirring the oatmeal in a pot with a force that seemed almost angry. "You're up late," Judith said finally, her tone sharp enough to slice through the quiet. "It's 7, Marlene replied softly. "I said late," Judith snapped. Marlene felt her shoulders tense. Judith had always been opinionated, sometimes overly involved, but this new harshness felt personal, as if everything Marlene did in the last 48 hours was some kind of deliberate offense.
"What is going on with you, Marlene?"
Judith demanded suddenly, slamming the spoon onto the counter. "You've been acting strange. You hold that child like she's going to vanish. You keep her away from Elliot, you hover like something terrible is going to happen. What exactly are you trying to say?" Marlene held Lila tighter. "I'm not trying to say anything. I'm taking care of my daughter." Judith turned slowly, eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Are you? Because it seems to me you're creating issues where none exist. Elliot is her grandfather. She loves him. Why does that bother you?" Marlene stepped back instinctively, her heart thumping against her ribs. She didn't trust herself to speak yet. If she said anything at all, anything even slightly tense, Judith would twist it into an accusation, something Marlene wasn't ready to face directly.
Judith pressed on.
"You should be grateful she has someone who comforts her at night. Not every child is lucky enough to have a grandparent they're so close to." Those words stabbed deeper than Judith could possibly understand. Before Marlene could respond, Elliot walked into the kitchen. His presence filled the room instantly, not through volume or force, but through a silent tension that Marlene felt like a blast of cold air. He wore the same quiet expression he always did, his silver hair slightly mussed, his robe tied loosely around his waist. When he saw Lila, his face lit up. "Good morning, sweetheart," he said, taking a step toward her. Lila wiggled in Marlene's arms, reaching out desperately. "Mama," she whimpered.
"I want Grandpa."
Marlene stepped back so quickly she almost hit the counter. "She's eating with me this morning," she said firmly. Elliot froze for half a second. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but Marlene saw it. Something flickered behind his calm exterior. Something sharp, brief, and unsettling. A moment later, he smiled again.
"Of course. Breakfast with Mama. That's all right."
Judith's eyes darted between them, her suspicion hardening like cement. The tension was thick enough to suffocate. Marlene couldn't stay in the kitchen another second. She carried Lila upstairs, her arms shaking by the time they reached the bedroom. The moment the door closed, Lila burst into tears, kicking and screaming for her grandfather. The cries were so intense, so desperate, that they echoed down the hallway. Marlene tried everything, rocking, singing, rubbing her daughter's back, offering toys, snacks, anything, but nothing worked. And then, as if summoned by the cries, Elliot appeared at the bottom of the staircase. "Marlene," he called softly.
"Is everything all right?"
"No," she whispered under her breath, hugging Lila tighter.
"No, nothing is all right."
She retreated into the bedroom and shut the door before Elliot could come any closer. She leaned her back against the wood, breathing hard, her hands trembling around her daughter's small body.
"Please stop crying, sweetheart," she whispered. "Please.
Mama's here." But Lila only sobbed harder. For a moment, Marlene felt like she was losing her mind. The conflict inside her was unbearable. She couldn't keep Lila near Elliot, yet she couldn't calm her when she pulled her away. She felt completely alone. Around noon, her phone buzzed with a text.
It was Holly. "Did you leave yet? Are you okay?"
Marlene's throat tightened. She typed back slowly.
"Not yet. I don't know how."
"You have to." Holly replied almost immediately. "Pack your bags today."
"Come tonight. You can stay there. You not imagining things. Something is off."
"I'm worried about you. And about Lila." Marlene's eyes burned. Her hands shook as she typed back. "I'm scared." "Of course you are. But I'll help you."
"You not alone.
Just come." Those words not alone were enough to make something shift inside her. Enough to make her stand. Enough to make the decision feel real. That afternoon, when Judith and Elliot went to the grocery store to pick up supplies for dinner, Marlene used the brief window of quiet to start gathering her things. She grabbed the backpack she had hidden under the bed, added more clothes, diapers, wipes, medication, and Lila's favorite pajamas. She slipped her passport and important documents into the front pocket. She took the stuffed bunny. Then she added the phone charger and hid the bag again in case she lost her nerve and needed more time. But this time felt different. This time, she didn't feel the paralyzing fear that had stopped her before. This time, she felt something strong, a fierce clarity that came from knowing there was no longer any safe path except the one that led her away from this house. When Jake returned home around 4, he seemed tired but calmer than the night before. He dropped his bag, kissed Lila's head, and asked Marlene if she wanted to talk. She hesitated. "About last night," he said quietly. "I shouldn't have raised my voice."
"But Marlene, you scared me."
"I don't understand why you're acting like this."
"My dad loves Lila.
You know that." Marlene bit her lip. "Jake, I'm not saying he doesn't love her. I'm saying something feels wrong." Jake rubbed his forehead. "You're anxious. You're exhausted. It's been a crazy few months for you." That sentence for you hurt more than it should have. "Jake," she said softly, "please watch the footage. Just once." He closed his eyes.
"Marlene."
"I can't. Because if I watch it, it means I'm agreeing there's something to doubt." She stared at him, stunned by the honesty of that statement. "And I don't want to doubt my dad," he finished. There it was. The truth she already knew. Jake wasn't protecting Elliot. Jake was protecting his idea of Elliot. And Marlene knew she could not change that, not today, not tomorrow, not in a week. After dinner, when the house went quiet and dusk soaked the sky in fading light, Marlene made her final decision. She bathed Lila, brushed her curls gently, and dressed her in soft pajamas printed with little yellow ducks. The toddler clung to her unusually tightly tonight, perhaps sensing her mother's internal war. As Marlene rocked her daughter to sleep, tears slipped down her cheeks. She whispered into the soft hair at Lila's temple.
"Mama loves you.
Mama is going to keep you safe. I promise." She let the child fall into a deep, peaceful sleep. Then she placed Lila carefully into her arms and grabbed the backpack from under the bed. At 10:30 that night, while the house was wrapped in silence, Marlene opened her bedroom window. It led to a small slanted roof that extended over the porch low enough for her to climb down safely while holding Lila. She slipped out into the night, moving quietly, heart racing. The cool air hit her skin, carrying the scent of damp grass and distant traffic. She climbed down slowly, one step at a time, clutching her daughter protectively.
When her feet touched the ground, she exhaled shakily.
Halfway to the car, a porch light flicked on behind her. Her blood froze.
Marlene. A voice called from inside the house. It was Elliot.
She didn't turn around. She couldn't. She tightened her hold on her sleeping daughter and ran. She reached her car, opened the door, laid Lila gently in the back seat, and climbed behind the wheel. Her hands shook violently as she fumbled for the keys. She could still hear the faint echo of Elliot's voice calling her name from the porch.
Marlene.
Come inside. Please. Her fingers finally found the ignition.
The engine roared to life.
She glanced at the rearview mirror and saw Elliot standing motionless on the porch, staring out into the dark yard. The expression on his face was impossible to read, part sadness, part confusion, part something else entirely. She put the car in gear and drove.
Away from the house. Away from the tension.
Away from the unspoken fear that had consumed her for weeks. As the road stretched out before her and the night swallowed the Carter home behind her, Marlene felt her lungs fill with something she hadn't felt in months.
Air.
Freedom.
Hope.
But she also felt something else, the knowledge that this was only the beginning. Jake would wake. Judith would panic. Elliot would ask questions. The family would call. Pressure would come. Accusations would follow. But she didn't care. Because for the first time in weeks, maybe months, Marlene felt certain of one thing. She had made the right choice. And no guilt, no judgment, no denial would convince her otherwise.